Welcome to episode 113 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Dan Tricarico about how teachers can conquer anxiety, overwhelm, and the pressure to always do more. Visit truthforteachers.com to get a transcript of this episode or to share your thoughts in the comments. I am super excited to have Dan Tricarico back on the show today. Dan and I met a couple years ago when we were both speaking at this conference. And I remember walking away from the conversation with him thinking, this guy is the real deal. I don't know why that phrase, that's the one that stuck in my head. He's the real deal. He just came across to me as being so grounded and so sincere in everything that he said. And we had a pretty in-depth conversation that day. And to me, it was just so obvious that he was truly passionate about everything that we spoke about. And he just had a pure heart for helping kids and teachers. So Dan had published a book at that point. It's called The Zen Teacher, Creating Focus, Simplicity, and Tranquility in the Classroom. And I'm telling you, there aren't very many people who could pull off writing a book like that. Tranquility and classroom aren't really two words that you hear together in the same sentence very often. You know what I mean? But when you meet Dan, and you will meet Dan here on the show in just a moment, you just immediately feel calmer and focused and a little more zen. So I interviewed Dan for the show soon after that, back in season 4. It was episode 10 in season 4. And you might have heard when he came on Truth for Teachers to talk about creating focus and simplicity and tranquility in the classroom. And I just felt so good after talking with him, so peaceful. I knew he was going to be conveying that same sense to listeners, but I felt that just from engaging in conversation with him. So I knew that I wanted to partner with him in a bigger way because Dan and I really share the same message of supporting not only kids, but also supporting teachers by helping them change their mindset. And his message about teacher mindset issues, his message is just so similar to mine, and yet it's grounded in a different perspective. Obviously, Dan has a male perspective, mine is female. Dan is a high school English teacher, and I was an elementary teacher, and he's on the West Coast in San Diego, and I've always been East Coast based. So it felt to me like partnering up would allow us to speak to teachers' needs in a way that's a little more balanced and a little bit more comprehensive than what I could do on my own. So I've had this idea in my head for about 2 years now to create some sort of resource that would help teachers conquer anxiety and overwhelm. I already have the 40-hour teacher workweek club, and that helps with a lot of these issues. It helps more than I ever thought possible when I first created it. That's sort of a byproduct that I'm not sure I was fully expecting. But reducing anxiety is more of a side benefit to being a club member. It's something that just comes as a result of being more intentional about your time and what you say yes to and simplifying your workload. But I still wanted to offer something to teachers that would focus entirely on the piece of teacher anxiety. I just wasn't sure what that would look like, or if it was something really that I was knowledgeable enough to create on my own. So last February, I was out in San Diego where Dan lives for another conference, and he and I sat down together and we hashed things out a bit, and now we've been working for the last 7 or 8 months on creating something together that addresses teacher anxiety. And it's called Finally Free, the Teacher Toolkit for Conquering Anxiety, Overwhelm, and the Pressure to Do More. And so today, we're going to give you some of our favorite mindset shifts and advice from the toolkit and talk about some ideas that will really make a big difference in how you feel. So Dan, you've been teaching high school English now for 25 years. I bet that feels crazy.
Oh my gosh, I have no idea how the time went that fast. I still remember being the new guy.
So what are some of the mindset pitfalls that you have observed yourself or maybe other teachers falling into that create extra anxiety?
Well, it's a very stressful profession. I mean, every profession is stressful, but I think that teaching is very unique. I don't think a lot of people understand kind of exactly what we do or what we're up against every day. So some of the pitfalls I've seen during my career and observed in other teachers that create anxiety, one of the big ones is isolation. I mean, most teachers, they're in one room. They have very little connection to other teachers. I know in some schools you have to poke your head out the door and look all the way down the hall and hope that the teacher pokes their head out at the same time because you can't leave your room. It's against the law to leave the students unsupervised. So just very little interaction, and that creates isolation, and that can raise anxiety. Another thing is there's just often one thing I've noticed is a tremendous lack of support from the administration, from the district, even the state. And for example, I've been declined for the last 4 conferences I've asked to go to just because there wasn't funding for it for whatever reason. And I've had to pay for a number of conferences on my own. And I've just stopped asking for supplies because they're just not there. Or I've had to pay for them myself. And that creates anxiety because, our PTSA, for example, does an annual PTSA supply day drive. And they ask parents and local businesses to donate supplies to the teachers. And I keep asking, when was the last time Apple or Microsoft had to have a supply drive? It just doesn't happen on that level. But we have to get donations because we just don't have the stuff. And the other big thing I see is, this is not going to be news to teachers at all, is just a tremendous sense of overwhelm. There's just always so much to do, and we have a 24/7 job, and the powers that be keep adding and adding and adding and adding things for teachers to do with very little support, certainly no more compensation. And the teachers keep agreeing to do it because they're givers and they put everybody else before themselves. But the problem is when you put all these situations together, it's a perfect storm of anxiety, stress, tension, and it just adds up, and it's not sustainable. I mean, I can't imagine doing anything else other than teaching. I love teaching. I've loved every minute of it. And I know a lot of educators feel that way. And, that's why we put up with the stuff. But one of the reasons that you and I do what we do is because, like I said, it's not sustainable and the stress has to manifest itself somewhere. And a lot of times teachers burn out, and I've seen them leave the profession. And you and I just want to make sure that it's dealt with in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. How do you personally cope with those moments of anxiety and all that pressure that comes with teaching?
Well, that's a good question. There was a while when I wasn't sure how to cope with it, and in fact, wasn't coping with it very well. Mm-hmm. I slipped into some clinical depression. I was on antidepressant medication. And that's about the time I said, I've got to do something here. This is not okay. I have to make it to retirement. And I saw other teachers melting down and burning out. And that's when I started the Zen Teacher Project. I said, these are some elements I can use to kind of calm down, to relax, to focus on what's important, to get rid of the stress, and have some intentional self-care practices. And I've used things like meditation and participating in what I call my Zen practice, which for me is writing, because that's the activity that makes me feel renewed and rejuvenated and fulfilled. But for other people, it might be gardening or quilting or working out or whatever. I've also, in the process of working through the Zen Teacher Project, I've come up with what I call the 5 S's. I didn't come up with them, but I just labeled them the 5 S's, which are stillness, silence, space, subtraction, and slowing down. And I have to tell you, practicing the 5 S's has really made a huge difference in calming me down and lowering my stress, decluttering and being still and being silent and just breathing and stopping and slowing down, because we don't do that in our society. Just one quick example. I, as you know, I private tutor on the evenings and weekends. Almost every teacher I know has a second gig to kind of make ends meet, and that also increases the stress and tension.
That's right.
And with every client, I arrive about 10 minutes early, and I park kind of down the street from their house, and I just sit in silence and stillness for a while to meditate or go over my lesson plan or just think about things. And it's become so valuable to me. I've gotten some funny looks from the neighborhood watch people, but that's okay. I'll take it. I don't care. It's important to me to do that. But, we could all do that. We could do that on the way to school or on the way home before we kind of re-enter that family situation that sometimes just shoots us into cyberspace or whatever, and it only takes a few minutes, just stop, slow down, be still, be quiet, listen to your intuition, listen to the universe, and see what happens. For me, that's been transformative. So the 5 S's I highly recommend.
Yeah, that piece of stillness, I think, is so important. And I think you are a much better practitioner of that than I am. That I really struggle with that. I try really hard, but it's taken years of practice, as I know it has for you as well, too. But it's something that I still struggle with. And I find myself really trying to look for those moments because if I had 10 minutes to wait on someone, I would probably want to pull out my phone and just start,
Oh, I
I
do
can
that
answer
too.
a couple emails. Yeah, exactly. It's such
Yes,
a
I do
temptation,
that
right?
too.
And we really have to be intentional about saying, you know what, here is just like a couple minutes to myself. This is what I say I want all the time. Can I just have a couple minutes of peace and quiet to myself? And instead of rushing to then fill that with something stimulating and to feel like I'm doing something, just to relax back into that stillness. And I think that is so powerful. And I don't feel like this is something that people are talking about enough in general, but especially not
Right.
with teachers. And
No.
that's one of the things that I love so much about your message is encouraging teachers. This is not big, complicated, time-consuming stuff. I mean, you're talking about just a few minutes of self-care, right?
Absolutely. I mean, some people feel like they have to fly to the Caribbean and spend a few
Right.
days, on a resort. No, it's just a few minutes. Because I mean, even when I
Mm-hmm.
was growing up, blue collar family, we could never afford anything like that. So just finding those few minutes. And you said a very important word, which was intentional. If we wait
Mm-hmm.
for it to happen, it's not going to happen. We have to plan it. And the second thing is, I'm as addicted to my phone as anybody else in this world, in this society we have today. And I'll find myself on my phone when I'm in those 10 minutes and I'll say, wait, again, it's coming back to, reminding myself, waking myself up again and saying, wait, as you said, you wanted those few minutes, you have them now, don't be on your phone.
Oh, that's such good stuff. So
Thank you.
in this toolkit that we created together, in the Finally Free toolkit, there's 10 audio modules, and each one addresses a different aspect of teacher anxiety and overwhelm. So there's one that a teacher can listen to when you feel like you're drowning and you feel like you can just never do enough. There's one for when you're worried about not being able to reach a student or prevent failure. There's one for when you feel guilty about letting others down. So different types of modules for different common types of anxiety. So Dan, you and I basically surveyed teachers to find out the types of anxious thoughts that they're feeling most frequently. And then we worked together to create about 20 to 30 minutes of audio that speaks directly to that issue in a way that is meant to be encouraging and helpful and sort of
Hmm.
lessen that sense of isolation that you mentioned in the very beginning, which I think is one of the biggest, I agree with you, is one of the biggest causes of anxiety when you just feel
Right.
not only do you feel alone, but you also sort of feel crazy. Like, am I the only one? Is everyone else like doing just
Exactly.
fine? Because everyone seems to be doing okay, right? Like,
Yes.
we may not always be talking about this stuff and you just feel alone. So that's what our hope is that when we're speaking to teachers, just like we are right now, that they'll feel like, okay, it's not just me dealing with this. So we've shared these kinds of things, and the hope is that people can listen to it over and over again. So whenever you're
Right.
struggling with that feeling, you have this message to go back to that's sort of training you in how to think. So I wanted to share with Truth for Teachers listeners some of our favorite takeaways from the toolkit. So would you tell us about which module is your favorite and why you think it's so impactful?
Sure. I think for me, the last module, number 10, Freedom from Neglect, is my favorite because it's all about self-care and that's my jam. That's what I'm all
Mm-hmm.
about. So I think that module is so important because in our society, our culture, we don't value taking care of ourselves. We seem to idolize this idea of busyness and overwork and overscheduling. And that's why everybody's so frazzled and burnt out. No one stops to take care of themselves anymore. And that's why I'm on my soapbox. And I always like to talk about how there's a difference between being selfish and self-care and practicing self-care. Because selfish says, I want this for me and I want more than everybody else. Self-care says, I want this for me because I need to take care of myself so that I can be better for myself and everyone else. And that's a huge difference. It sounds the same and it kind of looks the same from the outside, but it's different. And I think that's one thing we talk about in that module. So I would recommend when I think of my favorite, that's the one that comes to mind. The second one would be module 2, freedom from worry about students, because I think every teacher worries about his or her students. And a lot of teachers you've heard refer to the students as my kids, quote unquote, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we take their well-being very seriously, and we lose sleep over how they're doing and their home life and all of that. And I don't know if it ever stops, because I'm thinking of a former student of mine who now, in this world happens to be a Facebook friend of mine. And she's been posting that she's having some health issues and she's been in the hospital. And I've been very worried about her. And she was in my class over 20 years ago and she's over 40. She's an adult in every way, but I'm still worried about her because she was quote unquote one of mine, and I don't think that ever goes away. So those are kind of the two modules that I really get behind and say, this is something that teachers are dealing with, and these lessons might really help them.
Mm-hmm. That emotional component, that emotional connection to students, it's so important to your success and effectiveness as a teacher, but it is also, it can be very draining, because you're giving of yourself all day long. I think that's just such an important point. I had a hard time. I thought about this question for myself to think about like which module was my favorite. And I feel like there's little gems in different ones. And I particularly like the two that you pulled out. I think I also really like the one about freedom from guilt, because that sort of ties into this whole, obligations to other people type of thing too. Because a lot of times I think as teachers, we feel guilty about letting other people down. And we're always letting someone down, right? Because when you stay late at school to do more for your students, you're letting down your family. And then when you say, nope, okay, I'm leaving at 3:00, I'm going home, I want to be present with my family, you feel like you're letting down your students or your colleagues or the school community. And so it's this sense that you just can't please everyone, and it's very draining when you try. So I really like the module on that freedom from guilt, because we're sharing these strategies around, you can't base your self-worth on what you do for other people, because then when you don't do something, now you've made yourself less valuable. And that's a really dangerous road when you're in a service-oriented profession like teaching, because there's a lot of people who are going to want your time and your energy and your emotional labor. So, none of us can be or play the role of the teacher or the life partner or the parent, whatever role we're playing. We can't be that person that we want to be 100% of the time. And so, we have to retrain our minds to love and accept ourselves unconditionally, no matter what we do or what we don't do. And one of the points from the toolkit that we talk about is separating who you are from what you do.
Exactly.
Because who you are is always just right, even when what you do is maybe not the right choice, or maybe you made a mistake, or maybe you let someone down. Who you are is different from what you do. And you have to really value yourself, get your sense of self-worth from just being who you are, because you have inherent worth and value, and you don't have to earn that. And your worth doesn't come from pleasing other people 100% of the time, because that's not going to happen.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think what you said about you're okay the way you are, regardless of what happens with what you do, is so important. And that took me years to figure out, because like you said, it's unavoidable. You're always letting somebody down. The energy that you have and the emotional component that you mentioned is finite, unless you recharge it. And that's the beauty of it, is it can be recharged. But try using your phone when all of the energy is gone and you haven't plugged it in. It's not going to work. And you're not going to get done what you do. You can recharge it, but it's not going to work until you do. And you have to recharge yourself too.
So I want to let teachers in a little bit behind the scenes as to how we made the decisions about the format of this toolkit, because there really isn't anything else out there like this. And basically we decided that, you can go through, as a teacher, you can go through these 10 modules and you can complete them in order like a course if you want to. So we're providing the structure for that. So you can sign up to get an email once a day for 10 days or once a week for 10 weeks. And then you'll feel like someone is following up and reminding you and encouraging you to stick with it. And we did that because when we surveyed teachers about this, I don't think either one of us were anticipating this. I don't think I was, but there were people who worried that they would buy the toolkit and then they would never remember to use it if they didn't have that follow-up. So that's when you and I talked and we were like, oh, okay, we need to have some sort of structure here if people want that.
Yes.
But we were really intentional about calling it a toolkit, not a course, because on the other hand, there's also a lot of people who already feel guilty that they're not keeping up with things. And, we don't want it to be one more thing now that you feel like you only got halfway through and you didn't finish. That's really unsatisfying. So it's structured as a toolkit. So you can, if you want to, go through it like a course, or just listen to whatever module you need whenever you need it. So you might listen daily for a week and then go a few weeks or a few months without using it at all. You have it for the rest of your teaching career. So you can use it however you need it. And though you do get a PDF version of the transcript if you'd rather read, it's audio based so that you can just listen during your commute or while exercising or cooking, cleaning, just going about whatever your regular routines are.
The thing that was amazing to me about this and about calling it a toolkit intentionally was that, I consider myself a fairly with it guy. And it was a while into the process with you before I really kind of got the concept, because I was used to online courses and I was like, yeah, you would start at the beginning, you would go through, it's kind of sequential. And then for some reason, as it will happen with students and learners, the light went on in my head and I realized what you meant by toolkit, that each lesson was a specific tool to use when you needed it. I mean, I looked at it this way. If I have a toolbox filled with a hammer, a wrench, and a saw, and some WD-40, I'm not going to take them all out at once and use them in order. That's ridiculous. If I need a hammer, I'm going to take out a hammer. If I need a wrench, I'm going to take out a wrench. You take out exactly what you need when you need it. So that flexibility and that idea of, I don't have to do it all, and I have it whenever I need it, and I'm just going to take out this tool because right now I'm dealing with guilt, so I'm going to take out the module on guilt. Right now I know I've been letting my self-care lapse, so I'm going to take out the module on self-care, and 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and bam, you've got a new plan. And as you've always said, and I love this image, that we are going to be that voice whispering in their ear and speaking into their hearts and mind about how to make small shifts to kind of change that mindset and take care of themselves. And I am just so thrilled to be a part of that.
I love that analogy with the toolbox. And I feel like this is sort of the coolest thing about when we work together, Dan, because we're always thinking the same thing and saying the same thing. We just express it in a little bit different ways. And that's why...
That's the fun part.
Yeah, it is. It really is, because, it's not very often that I talk to people that I feel like really are, have the same vision for helping teachers in this area that I do. And that's how I feel about you and your work. And it's just, it's just really exciting to feel like you are reinforcing all of the things that I've been teaching. And I'm reinforcing all the things you've been teaching. And we're just sort of coming from different perspectives with different life experiences and, sort of driving home these key points in different ways, and they complement each other so well. I'm so excited.
I think that's true. Yeah, no, I think we do complement each other. And in fact, I'll tell you, and I hope it's okay if I'm saying this on your podcast, but I was very humbled when you said you were interested in working with me on this. I thought, my gosh, she wants to work with me on this because I know your work and I know how much you help teachers. And so I'm just giddy to be here. So thank you.
You're very welcome. I think this is going to be amazing. I can't imagine a better person to have partnered with on this.
Oh, thank you.
But anyways, okay, so enough about us, because I could just talk about how much I admire your work and how much I love what you're teaching teachers all day.
And you.
I want to circle back around to this idea of how these mindset shifts happen over time, because I've noticed it. Again, we're saying the same thing here, where a lot of these things that we're realizing now and that we're explaining to teachers now are not things that we knew in the beginning of our teaching careers.
Right.
And it's stuff that we've had to figure out over time, and that we've also had to practice over time, because maybe some of the stuff I may have known in my second, third, fourth year of teaching, but I didn't really get good at it. Like it takes a while to retrain your brain. You can't just like read about what you're supposed to do and then like, oh, okay, now I've got it. And that's the end of it.
Yes.
That's why, people who go to church, they go, you're supposed to go every Sunday, or, if you're going to mosque or temple or whatever, it's a regular basis, because you can't just go once and be like, okay, I have now arrived spiritually and mentally. I'm fixed. I'm done. I don't need to go anymore. I've been once and now I got it.
Yes.
A transformation of your mindset and developing into your best self, the person who you're meant to be, your full potential, is a lifelong process. And you really do have to retrain your brain to think in ways that will finally create freedom from anxiety and overwhelm. And that happens only over time, only with practice. And when I say that it's taken a long time to get here, not necessarily in some time-consuming or really emotionally intensive way. It's not that I'm, sitting down and studying a resource, for hours a day, trying to improve myself. It's just a matter of being mindful and observing the thoughts that are helping me and the thoughts that are harming me, and making sure that I'm slowly practicing mental habits that are positive. So a lot of that for me has had to do with the influences who are around me and the things that I'm filling my mind with and the people that I'm with. And I'm wondering if it's been the same for you.
Yeah, I think that I've been thinking a lot about goal setting recently, and I think what happens is people think you need to make these huge changes, and that just becomes so overwhelming that they don't do anything.
That's right.
But I think the watchword is consistency. And the phrase I keep in mind are tiny shifts. That's what I always think of, is all I need to do are make some tiny shifts, but over time and consistently, like you said, because if you make those small changes over time, but you stay consistent and you keep practicing those tiny changes, you create new habits. And then that's what sticks. And then that's when the behavior changes. If you're so intimidated by the size of the change that you don't even try, then nothing's going to happen. And the behavior is just going to stay the same. So what I love about our program here is how we emphasize the small changes that teachers can make over time to reduce their stress and increase their self-care. And I think another thing to keep in mind is that it's a journey. You're on a path now, and the path is not always going to be smooth. There's going to be bumps and bruises and stumbles along the way, and that's part of it. That's okay. And when that happens, you need to give yourself some grace and some forgiveness. You need to say, hey, that didn't work out exactly the way I hoped, but I can try again tomorrow. And just giving yourself that grace and forgiveness is going to help you keep going and be motivated instead of just throwing up your hands and saying, I'm out.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, when I was in the classroom, I was a teacher for 11 years, and I never had a formal mentor. There was never sort of any kind of mentor program. Did you have a mentor?
Well, I was lucky. At my school when I started, the atmosphere was very supportive, and I don't think that happens with most teachers. When I started, the teachers in my department came up with all these materials, and just their arms were full, and they handed them to me and said, here you go. But most teachers, they hand them a textbook, they put them in a room, and they say, good luck. Mm-hmm. So, but over the years, that's kind of, dried up a little bit. I think now people are so tense. It's like every man or woman for him or herself. And so having that mentor, finding people like you were talking about earlier, where you have that like mind, where you are sharing a vision, is so important.
Yeah, it really is. And I feel like, when I think back on my teaching practice, I don't feel like I really did a good job of that because, I wasn't given a positive, supportive mentor. And a lot of the teachers that I sought out on my own for mental support were very negative, just like I was, right? So I wasn't necessarily looking for teachers who would make me better. I was just looking for people who would sit around and complain with me and let me vent and let me just, sort of agree and validate all the problems that we're having, letting me know, that is so wrong, Angela. I can't believe you're having to deal with that. And it did nothing for my attitude and my energy level. It just it kept me in that low place. And, as you and I have discussed here, I think one of the greatest needs for teachers right now is an encouraging mentor. And that's something that you and I are sort of hoping to be virtually through the toolkit, is 2 positive, supportive mentors who can encourage you on a regular basis and really give you strategies for working through your anxiety when it feels overwhelming.
Right. And one of the things you're making me think of is when I finally got to a point where I was older and more experienced and maybe had a few things to say about education, I started getting my first student teachers. And it's when I got my first student teachers that I realized I love working with teachers and helping teachers. And years later, when I started the Zen Teacher Project, it was like heaven to me, because I was not only working with and helping beginning teachers, but I was helping all teachers, whether it was in the blog or the book or the newsletter or the Facebook group, or now even in my online courses and this program. And just helping them kind of deal with these things and maintain their sanity and a level of performance and motivation so that they can make it through to the end of the career. Because again, I just saw so many who just were kind of not sure how to do that and bailing out. And so this path has been amazing for me, and I definitely see it as part of my passion for education, and even really kind of like a calling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that it is a calling for you. This isn't just something that you do. It's something that you love and you're super passionate about. And I'm really glad that you came on the show to talk about Finally Free and just sort of share your heart with teachers in this area. Can you give us a takeaway truth for the week ahead?
Well, I'm going to, I don't know how many people who are listening now listened when I was on your show before, but I was thinking, I just kind of want to, you talked about kind of hearing the same message over and over again and that consistency. And I wanted to share kind of the same message, which is the story about the yearbook advisor at my school and how she sent out a message to all the teachers and said, fill in this blank and we're going to put it in the yearbook. If my students only learn one thing from me, I want it to be, and then you had to fill in the blank. And I put, if my students only learn one thing from me, I want it to be that they realize they're okay the way they are. And that's what I wish all the teachers out there now would realize and know, is that you are okay the way you are. And that anything you do to improve yourself is great, but there's nothing wrong with how you are now, no matter what messages you're getting, no matter what that internal self-monologue, self-talk is telling you, that what you're doing is great. The fact that you're in education tells me that you're okay, but you are okay the way you are, and don't forget that.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you so much, Dan. I think this was awesome.
Thank you.
So Dan and I are making one of the modules in the Finally Free Toolkit available to you for free. So we're giving you Module 1, which is Freedom from Comparison. And it's designed for you to listen to when you're feeling not good enough and you're comparing yourself to others. So you can go to finallyfreetoolkit.com. And that's where you can learn more about the toolkit, and you can scroll down to the preview where you can download the audio and the PDF for that first module on comparison right now. So I encourage you to get that MP3 and let Dan and I speak some just positivity and motivation and some new inspiration into your mind and heart around that issue of comparison. It's at finallyfreetoolkit.com. And the link is also in the show notes for this episode. So in your podcast player, if you click the info for the episode, you'll see the summary of the episode and you'll see the link there. So you can go get that first module now for free. Have a great week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Truth for Teachers is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more great podcast recommendations, go to edupodcastnetwork.com. That's edupodcastnetwork.com.